And we ask all these things in your name. Amen. Amen. So I will now call to order the workshop meeting for June 21st, 2022. Welcome, citizens of Clay County. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend today's school board workshop. This workshop is our opportunity as your elected representatives to collaborate openly among ourselves and make decisions that will decide the future direction of our public schools and the education of our children here in Clay County. This will be an opportunity for the public to ask questions at the end of the workshop presentation. Questions will be allowed, public comment will not be allowed. If you wish to ask a question, please fill out a comment card and hand that card to a deputy. Your participation is welcomed and appreciated. And for the record, we have Ms. Bola attending remotely this morning, and all other board members are present. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Broski.
Madam Chair, I'd like permission to go ahead and change the order of the agenda since we have a special guest with us. We have Jory Vandervoort. I always get a little tricky, from Gallagher, who's here to give our property and casualty insurance program review. If she can go first, and she's a guest here. Let me turn it over to Doc. Would you like to say anything first to set this up, or no?
No, we can go directly. I will say, this is a standard operating process that we do on an annual basis. And of course, the last couple of years, we were not able to have the presence of Jory. It's been on the phone. So this year, we're privileged to have her here. So I won't keep us any longer. Let's go ahead and get to this. Go. Yeah, sure. It's awesome.
Thank you, Susan. My name is Jory Vandervoort. I'm with Arthur J. Gallagher, and as Susan mentioned, it's nice to actually be back with you guys live and in person, because I think the last 2 years I've called in on a conference call with you. So I wanted to thank you and just let you know I appreciate being here. Okay, awesome. So I think everybody has the handout, has a hard copy, and we'll try to go through some of these pages a lot faster. I gave you a bit of detail on some of these, but we won't go through some of these pages as fast as possible. Or we will go through them as fast as possible, because I know ultimately you want to get to probably the last 2 pages of this document. But just generally speaking, we're talking about the property, casualty, and workers' comp program for the Clay County School District. From a general standpoint, that you have the marketplace, which is the insurance that you're buying. You have what's called a protected self-insurance program, so you don't buy insurance from first dollar. You have different types of retentions for different lines of coverage, and then you buy what we call excess insurance. So when we're talking about the marketplace, we're talking about the marketplace for those excess coverages. The big picture, really for the past several years, we've been seeing a hardening and tightening of the marketplace. We definitely see that in the property market, workers' comp market as well, and you'll see that, and also within the cyber market as well. You'll see that as a reflection in your program as we get through it. Some of the lines are moderating. We're not seeing things as significant as they were in years past, but we're definitely seeing some resistance from the carriers in terms of the rates. Go on to the next page. This one talks just a little bit about the property and sort of what's going on with it. There's been a lot of stuff, not so much in Florida, but really generally across the nation, that have added to these, to the difficult marketplace. Even, while we might not have had the storm seasons really affecting Florida, there still are active hurricane seasons. We also have other types of risks. We have wildfires, we've had civil commotions, freeze events. All of these types of things are events that affect the general property marketplace. So we can go on to the next page as well. There's also a number of other coverages in addition for your program, which include the excess liability, general liability, that becomes slip and falls. You have auto liability, so, in terms of car accidents, sexual abuse and molestation. You have the errors and omissions coverage, and workers' comp. But generally speaking, we're still seeing a little bit of pressure in these different lines of coverage. we'll go one more over. That's the cyber market. So we were, as I first mentioned, we have the, really the marketplace, but then we also, you know, when they're looking at your program, they're looking at the exposures, they're looking at a number of applications. Susan and her team do a great job of getting us all this information. But just really from your standpoint, from a snapshot, we like to look at, you know, what's going on with the district from, you know, a real bird's eye perspective for you. Property exposures. So we're seeing, we actually increased the values, not we, but the district themselves did, but if there actually is a chart at the end of this that shows that the property values had really remained pretty stagnant. Over the last 5 to 10 years, we hadn't made too many huge modifications to that. And the carriers really want you doing that. They want you modifying, you know, just from a general 2-3% each year. And so, because you are required to insure your buildings to value, so if we have some, in order to get some more robust coverages, like what we call a blanket coverage, the district, we've always been successful in getting that blanket coverage for the district, meaning that, you know, if there was a building on there and it was valued at, say, $5 million, but it cost $5.5 million to replace, the blanket coverage would allow for that difference in the values. But this year, with the markets getting more tight, being more difficult, the carriers are really looking at the values, and so if they don't feel comfortable with your values, they're either going to restrict coverage or they're just not going to offer coverage in general. So the district and us looked at the property schedule and said, okay, we need to make a good faith effort at increasing the values, and they determined that we would go ahead and increase the property values. Some of that is, you know, some add-ons and things of that nature, but generally speaking, it was really a valuation change.
This chart is more value than replacement coverage?
This is your existing values,
Okay.
so you had just shy of $1 billion last year, and it's basically, I mean, and you know, with a few minor changes, but you would basically be saying, we're taking the 978 million and just generally gonna across the board increase those values, putting on our own increased inflationary number. You typically do the same type of thing with your homeowner's insurance, so they automatically make you do it. In our sense, they haven't automatically made you do that on a year in and year out basis, so we're trying to catch up and get those to a more truer.
And how often do we evaluate that? Is that evaluated?
They're evaluated every single year, but in the past, we've more, you know, just added on, you know, changed, you know, if there were additional buildings to add on, yes, we'd go ahead and add those, and then they would also modify some of the personal property items as well, but not making any big massive change to the building values. So we did need to make a big change to the building values. And unfortunately, you'll see that, you know, that certainly puts a add-on to the property increase, because this year we got both the rate increase and the property value increases.
Did somebody from your team physically go to each school and appraise these?
No,
Or
no.
evaluate
This
them
was,
personally?
your team was, you know, just taking an eyeball at it, looking at, you know, maybe the price per square foot and saying, okay, we're at this, but we really, based on today's trends, we really should be at X. So that's sort of where we got, that's how we got from A to B at that point. We also, so up here is really all the property values. Down here are your casualty exposures. That's the, I meant to change that so it wasn't an acronym, but that should be the operating expenditures, the gross operating expenditures, the payrolls, students, vehicles, and employees. These are numbers that the district, Susan and her team provide to us. And so that's just really a big, you know, like I said, a bird's eye view of, you know, a whole lot of applications and information that goes into the process. Are there any other questions? So, you know, as we mentioned from the onset, you know, one of the things when we're talking about the markets, we go out to the entire marketplace every single year for your coverages. So we don't like to just renew coverages from one year to the next. We want to make sure that, you know, we're getting, you know, the best pricing, the best terms, the best conditions from all the carriers. The page after this will actually show the list of markets and their responses. But generally speaking, we approach 48 markets, programs on your behalf, And of those, we had 14 that provided some quotes and indications, and we'll go through that. And, you know, when we send it out, basically what we're doing is we're putting together, you know, almost, you know, like a, you know, request for proposals from them, identifying, you know, what the terms and conditions are that we want. And then, you know, they either are able to do that, or they provide us a quote and say, here's what we can do versus what you actually want us to do. So that's, we had, you know, we definitely canvassed the marketplace. And that, it's hard to read, but that's a list of the markets and their responses. So we can go on to the next page. As I mentioned from the beginning, just to always keep it in perspective and try to keep, you know, this type of program, you know, how it actually works. When it comes to insurance programs, a lot of times what we think about really is like our own homeowners insurance, because that's the easiest thing for us to compare it to. So homeowners insurance is typically over here in what we would call a conventional insurance program, meaning there's no deductibles, or certainly very little deductibles. And as you know, or if you've ever had a claim, you don't have a whole lot of control over those claims. The insurance company comes in, which is great. They handle the claim, but you don't really get a whole lot of say in, you know, how that process is going to go. And so what we always advocate to our clients is to, you know, we want you to have greater control. And by having greater control means you take greater control of your losses, which you do. You have good loss experience, and if you're doing that, you can increase your retentions. And so you start paying, you know, the first $50,000, the first $100,000 of every single loss. And not only do you're controlling that claim from a loss control standpoint, but you're also controlling it from a claims standpoint. So you've hired your own claims administrators, and they come in and they have their own list of instructions, and they work with you to settle those claims. So that's really the type of program that we advocate. We advocate for our clients to get further along the spectrum when they can and move that way. So you guys are where you should be, which is you're taking large self-insured retentions. You're buying excess insurance on top of that. If you were buying insurance from a first dollar, your premiums would be, you know, 100% more, 100 plus more percent than what you're currently paying for those lines of coverage. So you're in a good position at this time. The next page of the proposal, or the presentation, I won't go through all the lines. I think a lot of you have seen this before. But this is again a bird's eye snapshot of what your program looks like. The easiest way I describe it is the yellow boxes are all your deductibles, your self-insured retentions, and sometimes you'll hear me, I use those terms interchangeably, but basically this is the amount that the district itself is absorbing for each and every loss. The various color-coded boxes are going to be the excess insurance, the insurance companies that are providing coverage to you. So in this case, you have your excess property program, and I noticed that says 16 million of wind. It should say 20, so I'll have to make that. I'll have to update that. You have your public entity liability, which is your casualty, which is, you know, if somebody slips and falls, comes in here, that's liability. Auto damage for, you know, liability damage for any auto accidents that we might have. Errors and omissions coverage for our school board members. If for the decision making that you do, if you were to get sued, this is your coverage as well. There's some crime coverage in there. There's other sexual abuse, things of that nature, different types of things that you might be sued for. You also have the workers' compensation, so if we have workers that get injured, teachers that get injured, any of the staff that gets injured, the district itself is going to pay the first $500,000 for that loss. There's coverage on top of that. Moving along, we have cyber liability coverage, we have equipment breakdown coverage, storage tank liability, and then also some active assailant coverage. So finally, we'll get to the premium summary. So we came up trying to look at you know, there are definitely a few increases, which the large majority of the increases are a result of, you know, from the property standpoint. Both your school board package and the school board itself, the school board package, which is one thing I didn't mention on the last line, but there's also property coverage within that as well. So you have your first layer of property coverage that's in the school board package and your excess property, so that's where you're going to see the biggest jumps in premiums. We've put together several different options. We looked at increasing your workers' compensation self-insured retention from the $500,000 to the $600,000. That would have the district absorbing an additional $100,000 of loss for not enough premium savings, so that you would get some premium savings. But Dr. Legecco and I discussed it, and it just didn't seem like a real feasible option. The other option from a property standpoint was to look at, you know, buying less wind, and we did, you know, there is a slide, I'm not going to flip to the next one, but you all can flip to it on your, I think it should be actually the last page. We can flip to it. It's the last one, it looks like that, yeah. So when we were talking and looking at options for property, a lot of times we like to look at the historical purchasing and, you know, how your program has changed and grown over time. And so you can see, looking at a 10-year snapshot, you know, 10 years ago, you were only buying $11 million in wind. And over time, as the market improved, we were able to continue to increase that level of coverage and get you up to the $20 million. You can also see over a 10-year period, your rate is basically the same as it was 10 years ago. To current, and you have twice the amount of limits, so you can see, you know, just from trying to keep things into perspective. But you can also see that property values haven't changed rather dramatically. So, you know, definitely, that's why we need to make some adjustments there as well. So if we want to go back to do one more. Thank you. So we have the workers' compensation SIR. So then option number 3 was to just actually reduce the wind coverage, take the top layer off of it, because that was actually a layer that was giving us the most challenge. And so there was just shy of $100,000 savings by doing that. So we looked at that. And then when we put together option 4, we combined option 2 and 3. And said, well, let's look at reducing the wind and increasing the workers' compensation SIR, and that's how we got to the different numbers within the chart. I believe that Dr. Legecco and her team were recommending sticking with the renewal of number 1. The feeling was that they've worked pretty hard to get to the $20 million windstorm limit, and also didn't feel comfortable with the savings that was being afforded by increasing the workers' compensation, because you would be exposing yourself to an extra $100,000 for each and every workers' compensation loss that would occur during the policy period. So it didn't really seem like it was a feasible return on the money there for any potential losses. But I'll leave that up to you. You guys have to make the difficult decisions. And so that's really where we're at. We can go on to the next page, which just sort of summarized, you know, the important notes regarding the renewal. As I mentioned earlier, we went to 48 markets. We got 14 quotes. We had 34 markets decline. And a lot of times, if you actually look into the declination, the reason that they're declining is not because they don't like your risk, it's just that they don't like the pricing that you're getting. They're basically saying the pricing is cheaper than what I can do it for, is essentially when you get decline. Because they actually do like the location of your properties versus, you know, coastal property. We consider the renewal pricing, although it's been increased given the current marketplace, we do still believe that it is competitive. The property rate increase is really consistent with what we're seeing from our other clients and throughout Florida. And the same goes with the fact that the balance of the increase is the total insured values. We've been seeing that the carriers are getting both, anywhere from, a 10 to 20% rate increase, but then adding on whatever value increase into that equation. The workers' compensation, again, is consistent with the marketplace. The cyber increase, also, that's been a really, really difficult market. This is actually a better renewal than we were able to do last year, but so the marketplace, I would say, with cyber is actually settling down a little bit. Last year was pretty difficult. Like I said, the option number 1 was the recommended renewal. Number 739, just give you a bit more detail on what we were putting together, and just keeping in mind that if we look at any of the options 2, 3, or 4, that those have you assuming more financial risk than what you're currently doing now. Are there any questions?
I just have one. Of the 34 markets that were declined, was that primarily because of the cost, the pricing, or was that other things involved
Yeah,
in that?
most of it is usually the cost. They're,
Okay.
we're going to them, and so they're writing business in Florida, and they're writing it, but they start looking at the risk, and they're basically saying, your pricing is cheaper, that I can't compete, is what they're saying.
Gotcha.
And so they give us that becomes a declination. They're not saying, we don't like the risk, they're just saying, we don't like the current pricing, and
Gotcha.
we can't do any better than what.
I didn't know if the quality of the company, the success of the company is ever factored in, or is it just primarily the price?
No, they're gonna look at both, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying, they like your risk.
Okay.
They just can't compete from a pricing standpoint.
Gotcha.
Or, sometimes, the good news was when we increased the values, the one thing we weren't getting back from the carriers was, we don't like the risk. What you could get is them saying, we're not really comfortable with those values, so we're either that would be, we don't like the risk.
Yeah.
So we didn't get that because we got our values to a reasonable number.
Right.
But we have had throughout, this year, we have had other clients and other carriers say, we're not gonna touch that one because we're not comfortable with the values.
Okay.
So we feel like we were in a pretty good spot.
Okay.
Is that it?
Thank
Okay,
you.
so what do you need from us at this point?
We are going to, there's an item coming up that you'll see here in a little bit, that we're recommending option 1
Okay.
for renewal, and it's on the consent agenda, but we traditionally have a presentation
Great, okay.
every year, so we're giving you the presentation and all of the details related to it. Anything else you want to say about that, or?
No, other than the reasoning for option number 1, which is really to maintain our current status. The decision behind that is really looking at what we've experienced this past year with our workers' comp claims and some of our liability claims. They were significant, so I am not me, we are not willing to take that risk this year to, especially what's happening, what I'm seeing happening out there in the employment side of it. As far as the property, I feel it's reasonable because we needed our values to go up. Obviously, everywhere else it's being increased. So with that being said, I think we need to make our values where it needs to be as we're moving into that phase of increased. Next year, of course, we'll have a new school on board, so we'll be looking at this in a different manner next year. But for this year, I'm recommending to the superintendent for him to recommend to you guys, to the board, option number 1, that we stay the course and pay the increase of about $287,000 more.
Very good.
All right, awesome. So going back to the agenda itself, we thank Jory for being here today in person. You can stay if you like. There's a test at the end. It's an exit ticket to get out at the end. So
came all the way from Orlando.
Wow.
We'll drive home.
So do you remember when we used to have a special meeting just for this?
Yes.
Yeah, we meet over at Fleming Island
Well,
High
that's
School
what,
Media
yeah, because I
Center.
kept asking Susan, I said, you know, where is it gonna be?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure where we were doing
A
it.
special meeting just for property insurance.
Okay, awesome. So to carry on with the agenda, recognitions, we're going to recognize our 21-22 retirees. We have 125 retirees. So that's 22,755 years of service. We have a video format again. We found that to be the best format to honor them through a video type of format. So that'll happen at the meeting. We're also going to have Synergistics. It's going to recognize our accounting for the cost savings that they've had for energy. And then we have a check presentation from Jim Morris to the Education Foundation to support their initiatives. So then going on to the first item is the minutes for the school board meeting and workshop on May 24th and the discipline hearings for June 2nd. The second item is payment of the annual membership dues for FADS, Florida Association of District School Superintendents. The third item is the Clay Education Foundation Board of Directors. You know, Florida Statute 1001.453 requires this to be voted on by the board.
Thank you.
And so there they are, there's the list of names, all their directors, so we're in compliance with the statute.
This hasn't come to us for probably 10 years,
Yeah.
maybe 8 years, so it's been a long time. So thank you for moving forward and having us in compliance with this.
The next item is the payment of the annual membership dues for the Florida School Board Association. Next is the personnel consent agenda. Buried within the consent agenda, there's some job descriptions, one of which is a coordinator of workforce development, which is a coordinator 3 position. This has to do with the new initiatives that the governor brought forward dealing with workforce development and also the regionalization of those programs within our district and within the state. The second one has to do with, it's a simple change at the end, the qualification to be a GED teacher for adult and community ed. The third one has to do with, again, adult and community ed, their testing and program specialist puts in compliance with all of those new initiatives. The last one that you see there is a revision to the ESC assistant job description. It's required under statute that if you're at a Title I school, that the employee has to pass the parapro assessment in order to qualify for the position. It's not required in a non-Title I school. You know that we've had challenges in hiring people to be ESC assistants. So what the job description does is puts us in alignment with the statute, which basically says if you're at a non-Title I school, you don't need that as a requirement to be hired, although we do require it by the end of the first year. It provides some opportunities. We believe that it'll help us in the labor market that's tight relative to these positions in making sure that we provide quality services for our students.
How many current employees is this going to affect?
It's not going to affect any current employees
We'll have
because
to get that.
right now, it's a requirement that everybody has it. What we're saying is it's not going to be a requirement because it's not a statutory requirement for non-Title I schools. It does create a little bit of tracking, more closely tracking, because now you got to track employees that are at Title I schools versus non-Title I schools for that purpose. But when it comes to the issue of classroom assistants, we have many positions that were unfilled for a variety of reasons, including the labor market, pay, etc. We think this is a good strategy to bring us better results in that regard. So the next item is Kelly Services substitute. You asked me to take a look at substitute pay. This will put us in alignment with the other districts in Florida. I personally don't believe that it's enough, and eventually, you're going to have to at least go to the $15 you know, this kind of puts us in alignment with where we were at the end of last year. You realize that last year, just to kind of give you a flashback, we had really a shortage of substitutes. We had some challenges at the beginning of the year, if you recall. We had executive session on this, and to the board's credit, you instituted a four-part plan. The plan included having a building substitute, a substitute that was dedicated to that building. Universally, that is well received by everyone. They love that idea. In fact, there was begging and all kinds of stuff related to, please don't take that away from us. Because they want that person that they know gonna be there every day. You know, old steady Eddie that comes in every day. And then, if you recall, we also created building teams at the secondary level, kind of matching their planning periods in a way to do that. We also had a $20 a day bonus, and we also increased the compensation for individuals who gave up their entire planning period in which to cover those classes. So you had a good four-part plan. Even with that, you know, given some of the challenges related to the pandemic and the labor shortages, our fill rate was right at about 80%. Traditionally, it's like 94% to kind of give you an idea. This was a statewide and nationwide issue. So increasing substitute pay, this is kind of like, I'm going to present this as like, this is the halfway step to where we need to go. Right now, of course, Doc and her team are hard at work analyzing our budget. This is the absolute bare minimum as to what we need to do right now. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not going to come back to you in the future related to this particular issue, because it's an important issue. So that's kind of where we're at.
Maybe Dr. Legego could put together an estimate, a cost estimate of what you think it would cost the district annually to increase it to $50 an hour. And we'd have, you know, an idea. Once you get through the budget,
Right.
see what we got left over.
I'd also like to know the cost to bring substitute teaching back in-house rather than contracting it out.
Yeah, there'd be several. I know that there was a study that was done. I was in Human Resources at the time. The study was conducted, and it was more expensive to do it within-house than it was to contract out. In addition to the cost, the additional personnel needed in order to manage such a program. Every district our size that I know of goes out. You know, in St. Johns County, which is our closest neighbor of size, they use a different vendor, but they use ESS as their vendor. Of course, Duval uses ESS. Every district that I know of contracts out. We'll be glad to look at the cost analysis for you.
Was that based on employee versus being self-employed?
Right, the additional costs that are borne by the district, with the person being an employee.
Yeah. So we could still look at the other.
It had something to do with insurance at the time.
The health insurance was an issue, I
When we
think.
switched to it, we just couldn't afford.
That's
The
right.
legislature had changed and we
Yeah, that's why I'm
couldn't afford
thinking if we
that.
look at the self-employed situation.
But it was a much better model when it was in-house. You know, especially at the elementary level, the teachers there liked knowing that, you know, they had the same substitutes coming to their school all the time and knew the kids, so it wasn't like an unknown new person that, you know, children might take advantage of. They knew that the lesson plans were being followed and their learning gains were continuing. And then when we switched, and Kelly Services has done much better than when we first switched over, but when we first switched, we were getting phone calls all the time that it wasn't working, and they, you know, wanted people at high school that was qualified for math, and, you know, they would be, the math teacher would be teaching English, and an English teacher would be, you know, somewhere else, and it just, they had to work out a lot of kinks, but I think they did.
Yeah, and I think
certainly
that
did.
we can work to improve the model by which schools feel more comfortable with substitutes that go. But in those days, when I started, there was 22 schools, and now we're 42, go to 43. So the world has changed radically as far as that goes, and the ability to sustain that program and recruit people is really a full-time. That is their only job.
Right.
if you were to look at placing this into an HR type of role, you would have to hire another group of individuals to do that in order to recruit individuals or attempt to recruit individuals. As you know, the primary focus of HR is recruiting teachers. So right now, this might be a good segue to that.
And the impact on our support staff, having to get those substitute, calling, their busiest time is in the morning, and they're trying to, at 6 a.m. when they find out a high school teacher is gonna be out, they're trying to call somebody and get them in, yeah, so it was.
So I do have some good news, if you want to look at that way. 200, since August 1st of last year to now, so if you're looking at August to now, almost 1 year, close to 1 year, 283 instructional resignations or retirements, left the district. The average is 360 a year. So we're actually below that. So the thought of like everybody leaving the profession and all of that kind of talk hasn't materialized in Clay County based on the data. There's currently 82 instructional vacancies that are open. We're actively recruiting individuals to come teach for us. I think that HR has done a great job of where we are right now towards the end of the year. We're in a good position with this, where we are right now as far as that goes. Remember, we talked a lot about recruitment and retention of employees in a tight labor market. We talked about the fact that you not only have to recruit them, but then you have to retain them. And to the board's credit, we have teacher support coaches as well as a teacher support coach coordinator to provide those daily supports with teachers, especially people who are new to the profession. Because if you hire, let's say I think the number was like 140, brand new to teaching, never taught before last year, and over 75% of them were not College of Education trained. These are simply good folks that have a different profession, had a degree, decided they wanted to become a teacher. Well, those folks require intense support. You just can't give them a key and a textbook and say, go to it, Tiger. There's a whole group of individuals that need to support those individuals. So I know all of that is going on. I feel really comfortable with where we are, given the overall environment that we're operating in. I feel like the district team has done a great job as to where we are right now in regard to all of that. That doesn't mean it won't be difficult, especially when you get close to the start of the school year and positions that pop open that are in specialized area of certification, such as higher level math and science in particular. Our ESC vacancies are another area that are challenging because some of the children require intense support, and you have to be a special person to operate in that environment. So all of those things are going on right now. I'll just assure you that I feel really comfortable with where we are. In fact, we're in a better position now when it comes to number of resignations and retirements, number of vacancies, where we are now in comparison to previous years when I was in HR. We're actually in a better statistical position than we've been pre-pandemic. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be challenging. One of the things that we are asking for some help with contractually is the transfer of individuals. What tends to happen is within a school district, people transfer from position to position, and we're trying to contractually make that cutoff time sooner so that everybody stops moving. So this way you can have people from the outside come in and fill all those positions in the amount of time. So all of that stuff's happening behind the scenes, and I feel good about it. And just a little segue to the substitute scenario as to where we are.
Mr. Brodsky, do you remember last year at this time how many vacancies we did have? Was it over 200?
It was over 100 for sure. And we meet every week. We keep track of it intensely. We start to, in the hiring process, when you see a candidate, and let's say you have a group of candidates, you know, a couple things run through the hiring administrator's mind. One of which is you're looking at all of the candidates and then you're thinking that perhaps there'll be another candidate
Right behind them.
that'll come in and you're waiting for that candidate, you know, to show up. And so sometimes you have to remind hiring administrators of where they are on the timeline and the process, and try to encourage the hiring of the individuals that you have. Because those people that, let's say there was a list of 15, well, there's no guarantee that that person that you were looking at and considering in that list of 15 doesn't go somewhere else, right? So there's, anybody that's hired people kind of realizes that that's the psyche. Is this the person that's going to be the best candidate for the school and for the kids?
I remember the recruitment fair, if I remember correctly, they said there were like 17 jobs that were offered right there that day. And after that, was that pretty successful? I mean, did we continue on with getting some of those people hired?
Yes, and we're doing an even better job at tracking those students that were interns and trying to get them to come. And you'll see that there's several affiliation agreements on this agenda related to relationships with colleges, encouraging people to come over and intern, because I'm very confident that people that come and actually work in Clay County and meet the people there and establish those kinds of relationships will quickly realize that this is a good place to work and try to encourage them to come over. So I feel good about that. You know, there's several other areas of the organization where I'm not as confident, you know, about the hiring of people, the staffing. But in the educational world, I feel like we're doing a lot. And then the board, to your credit, did several things related to the environment, such as COVID leave, such as what we did for substitutes and improving that, such as what we did with compensation, such as what you did with insurance. You know, really, I remind people all the time when somebody comes up with a perhaps not flattering comment. You know, you're focused on the one comment, and I'm thinking, take a look at the big picture of what you've done. You guys have done an awesome job of providing an environment in a difficult world that we live in which working for Clay County Schools is a pretty good place to work.
Mr. Brodsky, have we tapped into our, I don't know, what they're called different things at different schools, but the PFA at our various schools about, you know, partnering with them somehow to recruit parents that want to substitute teach?
We have. We had a whole program with Kelly. We got some folks to do that, and the idea was to have people, they could sub at the school where their child goes, and they're.
I remember we talked about that. I just wasn't sure if we involved the PFA, because they're so good at getting communication out to parents. They have their network.
We used, Mr. Brodsky, what we used was Peach Jar.
Okay.
That goes out to all
Yep.
parents.
Uh-huh.
And we held several.
Peach Jar is what used to be like the Tuesday folder.
Correct.
Correct.
We had several informational meetings just telling people, hey, do you have a 4-year degree? If you have a 4-year degree, we can help you become certified. And if you're interested, come find out the process. And they did it regionally to help with that. And so we got a lot of support people to go over, which is good because they're already invested in our schools.
Right.
And, but we had a lot of parents that, a lot of them have no idea
Right.
that with a 4-year degree, if they're not out of the College of Ed, that they can become a teacher.
Right.
The other
They
thing
don't
that.
even need a bachelor's degree to be a substitute teacher.
Mhm.
So
Correct.
I think, I just don't know how much we've worked with our PFAs, and they're so, at a lot of our schools, they're such great partners with getting needs met.
I will definitely get Ms. Lawson to use that avenue also. We have a meeting today because with the new statute for the military,
Right.
I want to tap into that.
Yeah.
Because now if they have an honorable discharge and they've served 4 years, that counts for 60 college credits.
Yeah.
So with that and a 2-year
Right.
for 60 credits, they too can become certified. Plus they have a lot of things to help them with that, a lot of waivers. So with us being a large military town, we're gonna, now that that has been signed, we're gonna look into a way to tap into that as well.
Excellent.
Okay, so we're up to K-12 academic services overnight travel. Next, you're going to see some of those articulation agreements. The first one is UNF, the dual enrollment. This is students, high school students that take college courses for college credit.
And that's primarily going to be on the UNF campus, correct?
Correct.
Was that my understanding that? So, and I know it targeted was Oakleaf, but if there were other students that
Yeah,
they'd be open to them
welcome
as well,
to
okay.
And then kind of similar to that, but also creating a pipeline for future teachers is the next item, which is the addendum to the articulation
Right.
agreement, which allows them to take some college education courses, trying to encourage individuals to get into the teaching profession. Next is the FLICA agreement. You know, each year this comes before us, so that's with the Department of Military Affairs. You know, about 150 graduates per class, and we've been doing this for, I can't remember the year that it started, a number of years now. It says 2001, so that would be, what, 21 years that we've had that program. Next is dual enrollment with St. John's River State College. Their dual enrollment agreement. Next is the early college program. That's what used to be called collegiate high school. It's Orange Park High School, Middleburg High School, dual enrollment. Students can earn their AA degree from St. John's River State College. Next is the interlocal agreement with South Village Community Development. They allow us to use their facility for the Middleburg swim team. And this is the standard contract for that.
I have a question regarding that. I've had a couple of parents come to me asking about a swim team at Keystone, and because of course we have a lot of camps that have pools and things like that, and so what would be probably the route that they?
So traditionally, usually through the athletic department, they would reach out to the community organization that has the facility to do that. Then there's an interlocal agreement that goes through Mr. Bickner's office in order to seal that, which is what this is in this particular case for Middleburg. So a similar fashion, just a willing participant there, and then of course they have to meet the requirements insurance-wise, etc.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Keystone should look at having a row team.
Huh?
All your lakes, you should look at having a row team.
Lakes, well, just the fact that we have all the lakes and everything, but we have a lot, you know, when the lakes went down, a lot of these camps put in Olympic-sized pools.
Oh,
I mean, we have Salvation Army, we have quite a few of them in the area, so, and I've had parents express an interest, you know, too, for that, so.
So next is,
That's the biggest problem, is finding somebody that lets you use their pool.
Yeah.
And it's for the Olympic-sized pools that are big enough to hold a meet, because most of the schools don't have that.
Right, exactly.
so next is CTE out-of-state and overnight travel. This is the CTE. This kind of lists out when every state, national, and competition is way ahead of time. You know, Ms. Paul
I
and
appreciate that they bring that so early.
Ms. Mosley do a great
They
job.
do a wonderful job.
I have a question about that too. I noticed a couple of those were quite a distance away. I think one was in Colorado. Now, the cost of those things to our students, I mean, how's that?
Some of it's by the students, some of it's paid for through the chapter,
Right,
where they put that aside in order to help comp out the travel for that individual that goes. And of course, the difficulty is you don't know if you'll have anybody that's going to qualify. or
Gonna
not.
qualify,
So,
right. Okay.
Next, we're up to behavior management consultants. These are individuals that help out that have board certified behavior analysts. So this is a contract to provide that service. I believe in the entire district of Clay County, we have one individual that has the certification to be a board certified behavior analyst that works with our most difficult students with behavioral issues. Sometimes there's the need to contract out additional services for these individuals, and that's what this contract is.
Now, are all schools, is this available for all schools in the
Yes,
county?
it's districtly distributed depending on the need.
Okay.
So for example, when a student's level rises to the level in which a board certified behavior analyst is needed.
Okay.
I can't remember the individual's name. Her maiden name is Code, but she got married, so I don't remember. I don't remember the new name that works
Amanda
for
Brower.
What's the last name?
Brower.
Brower. Amanda Brower.
Or
I
something.
just knew she got married. She was no longer Amanda. And she would be the one that would handle the most difficult cases that we have. Next is the contract for Alonzo Sign Language Interpreters. So this would be a contract for interpreters. These are deaf, hard of hearing interpreters, not language like Spanish, etc. interpreters. And so this is the contract with that company. It's a long-standing contract with Alonzo Sign Language Interpreting. So a little fun fact is, under ADA, when a deaf, hard of hearing student participates in even after school activities, they are entitled to interpreter services. And so I just happen to know that somebody special to me actually schedules those sign language interpreters for individuals, things like graduations and those kinds of things. To those people, this is the service that does that. Next is an affiliation agreement with Florida Gateway College. This is the place interns, practicums, observations. They're located out of Lake City. Next is an affiliation for the same sort of thing with St. John's River State College. And you see a similar agreement with Liberty University. The next is a different topic. This is our agreement with Flagler Health for the BRAVE program. The mental health of students is a challenge and an issue that we've seen risen over the years. You know that Senate Bill 7030 passed a year ago, requires us to assess within 15 days and provide services within 30 days of referral. This program is what kind of coordinates that to ensure that those services are provided. They're very successful. If you read in the outcomes, 514 students went through the BRAVE program this year, or last year I should say, 21-22. The year before that, prior to using BRAVE, it was 260 students. So we've significantly increased the services that we're providing students for mental health relative to that. There's been much legislation, including a new bill related to the mental health of students. And so this is an area that we need to continue to focus on. Don't want to segue to the allocation document, but that'll come up shortly. But there's 2 additional mental health counselors on that.
And is that available to all schools as well? That's my question. Okay.
Mr. Brodsky, how is that implemented is it during the school day? Is it an appointment after school hours?
This is for services outside of school.
Right. So these folks don't come into the school to provide the service, the student?
No, that's not my understanding now.
The student
This is the
doesn't.
connection of the services.
Okay.
So one of the challenges, and Ms. Fogarty, you can join in at any time, is not enough people are actually in the mental health profession. So the availability of services and the management of many people wanting the service with very few people providing the service, good old-fashioned supply and demand, creates a challenge. And we found this program to be successful. Basically we copied it off of what we saw other districts and their success rate was getting with this program in comparison to others. I would still make the argument that it's still a challenge to provide all the services that people need, and mental health in general, just due to the nature of mental health, is very challenging. Mental health obviously is not something that you can see, and therefore it's not as easy to
Hard to
A,
identify.
identify, recognize, and provide the right service for relative to that.
So, Ms. Gilhousen, one thing that the Brave referral process does is that it has allowed us to support our families. So it would identify that a child was in need of possible services, connect with the family, and get the family connected with the service.
Okay.
So it is outside of the school day, but it has provided a huge mechanism to close that gap with finding availability of personnel to support our students and their families.
That makes sense. So it's like Clay Behavioral, essentially.
No, because Clay Behavioral can actually provide counseling services.
Okay.
What they do is they actually find the available service that the
Okay.
student is in need of and will connect the family directly with that service.
So it's
So
like
Brave
the,
is not mental health counseling itself.
Correct.
It's a facilitator to help families
It's-
find
it's the
availability.
Yes.
it's the middleman,
I gotcha. The
Yep.
broker.
it's the broker.
It's facilitating it.
Okay, so the next item is, Jury left us.
Yes.
Okay, that's the item itself for Gallagher and insurance. Next, we have the proposed allocation changes, and I know that there's a lot of, so let's just, if you look at the document itself, well, one, at the bottom, you'll see that food and nutrition services takes up the 2 pages, or almost 2.5 pages. What we discovered was that the naming of that was not in alignment or congruence with the actual job description, so we wanted to make sure that we renamed it. You can see that under the food and nutrition services, there's really no changes except a change in the name for that, but we had to do that in order to be in total compliance and transparency. We had to do that for every school, which is why you see that so many of those things. Moving up the page, you can see under federal funds, you can see an additional pre-K teacher at LAE and one at OVE. What we are seeing is a lot of national data as well as state data about the number of students entering school through pre-K, through our ESE program related to those services. And there's many theories as to why that occurs, but you would need an instructional assistant for that position, and additional ASD teacher at Tynes Elementary School. Then you can see the mental health counselors. Michaela Buchanan is here. She's going to give a presentation at the end, but you'll notice a name change from where it says general funds to foundation partnership, in which there's a job description last month, in which the title would move from director to president CEO, as well as the vice president position. I don't want to steal the thunder, but essentially, you know, one of the things that we were looking for was the foundation to fund their staffing positions. So they are adding a vice president position, but the foundation is paying for that, as well as part of Michaela's position. And that's why you see it broken up into a different project number, so Doc can track that information, and I'm sure she'll have more to say when her presentation comes forward. I think the only thing that is significant at the top is, I'll say this, the supervisor of school improvement professional development was a supervisor 2. And you can see that my recommendation is the deletion of the supervisor position in favor of the director position. It was a director previously. Last month, you guys created, to your credit, the teacher support coach positions, as well as the teacher support coach coordinator, so to coordinate all of that work, as well as our curriculum specialist and our curriculum coaches. I think if I counted correctly, there's now almost 30 some odd people under her direction now. Previously, when it was a supervisor position there, I think there was 5. So that'll give you where the work is shifted in the district office. It is shifted from K-12 academics over to professional development and what we do and how we train people, you see a heavy emphasis on that. If there is any questions about any of these, I'm always available to talk about it.
I just have a question about the 2 mental health counselors. If we can find those 2 people, which I hope we can, are we assigning a certain school to those or if they're going to a certain place?
So how we do that, we do it based on data.
Okay.
So we look at our mental health referrals and then we assign them. I think right now they've got 2 schools at max.
Okay.
Because they have been able to, they've serviced over 386 students. Just in the schools that we have them in now.
Okay.
But all of it's based on data of that school, submitting a referral and where the greatest need is.
So I would add that there's a matrix that we use with which we look at the level of support for mental health at each school and what the available resources are. And sometimes it's varied. We do have some school counselors that are also licensed mental health counselors. They have additional credentials in order to do that. So basically, for every school, we look at what resources are available. We look at the data of the number of people who've had referrals at that particular school, and then assign the people there. There is no doubt, though, that the additional people are necessary based on the number of referrals, and what we see is an increase over time, relative to the number of mental health referrals district-wide.
What's the total number of mental health counselors we have? Are we fortunate enough to have one at each school?
We do not.
We do not.
We do not.
That would be the goal.
Yes, ma'am.
That would be the goal.
Now, if you are requesting that I add more allocations, I can certainly adjust it.
Can we afford
I've
it?
suggested and recommended that,
Doc's not paying attention, so.
I've suggested that's
But
a
you know,
need.
that really
That's an adding
should be, that is the goal that we should
Yeah.
be reaching
Well,
for
but-
and adding to, as necessary,
Yes, ma'am, and so, with all joking aside, one thing that we have done is we have been very strategic with our placement. We also contract with outside vendors so that each and every school has support. That is a goal to increase it, and we have been, y'all have been very generous with allowing us to increase each and every year, and we have done so. We contract with a lot of outside services who are able to get into our schools on a daily basis. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the opportunity to partner with outside resources to ensure that all of our schools are covered.
well, we appreciate it. You're doing a good job. Like Mr. Brodsky said, we know it's hard to identify specific students, so the more resources we have, the better.
Okay.
What about psychologists? Do you know how many psychologists we employ?
We currently have 2 jobs on the board. We have 18.
We have 18 total
Yes,
and
ma'am.
2 that need to be filled.
Yes, ma'am.
So, school psychologists, I hope they're not listening. But they would tell you that their job has become mostly assessing students
For ES.
for ESE programs. It's been a great deal of
That's what they've
time.
been doing for a while.
They would probably lament that their time of practicing psychology is now consumed with the testing of students.
Yeah.
So they're not really used, they're used for mental health
Referrals.
referral and testing, but they're not really used in that way. Perhaps you're thinking of mental health psychologists. And they're hard to hire. Also, like the 2 positions that are open,
Oh, I'm sure.
challenging to find people to.
Probably the salary.
Okay, so monthly
Private sector.
financial reports. Then we had the budget amendments and the deletion of certain items. And next is the awarding of the bids for floor services, electrical, and also wastewater management. You can see on the second page, it's Lance Tile, And then for electrical, it's Parks, T&M, and Premier. And then for wastewater management, it's Twofold Water Engineering. Next is a bid renewal for fresh produce, and you can see it's going to Gordon Food Service. Next is our interlocal agreement with Orange Park for the Town of Orange Park Police Department. As you know, we have officers at Grove Park, Orange Park Elementary, Orange Park Junior High, and we renew this contract every year with them. Next is similarly with Green Cove Springs, same sort of thing for Charles E. Bennett, Grove and Green Cove Springs Junior High. There's no change in the pricing that you see there.
Mr. Bresky, how many guardian positions do we still have filled?
Gosh, how many guardians are there?
14 of them.
You know, recently at a state conference, and the Commissioner of Education was there, and they were singing endorsement of the Guardian program. And so I just bring that to I think they were looking at, of course, we're in a very fortunate position that we actually have certified law enforcement in every school, right? But they were kind of talking about how having additional security, particularly at bigger schools with bigger properties, is really necessary in today's world. And of course, you know, we had our conference just after the Texas incident, so that was kind of fresh on everyone's mind. But the state was very much in support of the Guardian program, was the tenor that I received.
Is that how we've positioned ours, is in our larger schools?
Yes.
Yes.
All our high schools, our junior highs, and our largest elementary, correct, Mr. Chief White?
Yes.
And some of the outlying areas have two.
Like McRae.
And really, there comes where, you know, it's not like it is kind of like confidential information. We don't really post where they are,
Right.
kind of thing. But in general, I think that's a good general
Bigger ones,
statement
yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
All right, pre-qualification contractors. Then we have the Keystone Heights Elementary schematics for phase 1, 2, and 3 plan. Exciting.
And I'm hoping we'll move on to the rest of the phases. And last night, the Keystone Heights City Council approved a 52 home development that will go up behind Clay Electric. So just so you know, that was approved. And of course, I understand there's another 300 homes, and those will all be in the area of the Keystone Elementary School. I hope that we'll continue on and finish the projects there, because I know the growth is you know, those homes, probably those 52 will probably be built before, or finished before our projects
It's
are.
my understanding too that the water project is almost there, and so
Yeah.
hopefully, if successful, it'll be the first of its kind. If the lake recovery happens down there, I
Then
can
that'll-
easily see.
Exactly. And these are all within this, or the 52 are within the city, and the 300 are right there off a commercial circle, so that will be approved, so.
Okay, so now that's it for the consent agenda. We're up to discussion. So D1 through 6, you know that this past legislative session, there's been many laws that have been passed that are related to education or will have an impact on education. And so in coordination with our board attorney, and Mr. Bickner can be free to join in at any time, these are 3 items, 3 different pieces of legislation that we want to address to make sure we're in compliance. So the first part, because we're doing this under an emergency, the first part of each is the superintendent's memorandum to support the declaration that an emergency exists. You can see the document which kind of states the reasoning for an emergency. I will say, I don't mind saying this publicly, you know, not much guidance has come out of DOE, you know, relative to any of the legislation involved. In fact, we've received very little guidance relative to the legislation. So in looking at the fact that the legislation takes effect July 1st, is the primary emphasis for the reason why I would ask for an emergency declaration so that we can put a board policy in place and on the books prior to July 1st relative to these items. I also recognize that over time, things could very well change. And then, of course, we can go through that process. So my understanding of the emergency declaration procedure is that we would then have 90 days in which to then adopt any other policy or any changes to the policy if necessary. I will say, in general, all three of these pieces of legislation you sometimes use words that are ambiguous and not easily defined within the legislation. I would also point out that much of the legislation uses words like procedures and not policy as a word. I think that this is the most conservative approach to this issue, which would be to actually state it out. And when you look at the language that's been proposed that Mr. Bickner wrote, it basically covers all of the legislation and those things that would put into policy. Now, we'll say this, as a district, we actually had the vast majority of things that were included within the legislation already in place. Right, so now it's a matter of kind of putting it into a more concise format and then posting that information in a transparent way for the public to see. And that's really what we're into right now. But, you know, I think that my general thought would be that we wanted to have this on the books prior to July 1st so that no one can claim that we didn't have a policy in place relative to this legislation. So when you look at it, D1 is actually the declaration for emergency for 1467. In the near future, there will be some additional attachments that'll go in there. The attachments will come primarily in the form of our instructional materials manual, which covers the processes that we use in order to determine instructional materials that are used within our media center. There'll be a second manual that will be attached, also related to the textbook adoption process. There were slight tweaks in the law, but we were already ahead of that when it comes to the noticing of those meetings, the involvement of certain groups within that. So I feel good about where we're at. I think there's a lot of misinformation that's out there relative to these topics. I can assure anybody that's listening, the district is extremely interested in working with all groups, because really with public education, it's for everybody regardless of their view, and it's for all children. And so that's really the primary focus of what we're attempting to do. So the first two are related. It's an emergency declaration, and then you'll see the attachments that will be attached. The second one.
Before you move on.
Yes.
D2, it just has the legal notice attached to it. Are you
Yeah,
going to add?
Yeah, we'll add.
The rest will be added, so
Yeah.
we'll see the changes that were made with
Yeah.
the red line?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you'll see the changes that will be made. You'll notice that the declaration, the emergency declaration will look similar for all three, because they're all based on the premise that July 1st is right around the corner and no direction's been given. So we've written the policy in such a way where we've covered everything, where Mr. Bickner and I have met a couple times. We believe that those items have been covered within that. Many times it asks for a procedure or a policy related to that. So for example, if a person had an issue with a particular book, there's a book challenge procedure and process. That, by the way, has always been in statute and always been policy and has been done for, I guess, 15, 20 years since I can remember, right? So any new tweaks, have been made and will continue to work to put out transparent information to folks. So regardless, we want the involvement of our parents, of course, within the process, and so that's what we're attempting to do here through this. The second set is for House Bill 7, which talks about required instruction. And also you can see that has both the declaration of emergency as well as 2.02, which is applicant recruitment unlawful employment practices, and lists them out. I think it'd be safe to say that this wording comes directly from the statute relative to that, as well as 4.66, which talks about prohibition against discrimination and required instruction. This is essentially the, while CRT has never been a part of Clay County Schools, this would be the wording that supports that to be in compliance with the statute. Anything you want to add, Mr. Bickner?
The only thing that I was going to say is I've seen across, in the last 3 days, across the state that in line with this, professional development contracts are being amended because people who come in for professional development, you have no control over what they're going to say when they walk in the door. And so the contracts are being altered to include those things that are part of House Bill 7, so that those are not things that can be brought up, because I can envision, and I think other attorneys around the state can envision, certain people coming in for certain organizations to professionally train you and to give you insight, who are going to bring those things in to the forefront. Now, where the House bill itself specifically states you can teach things as long as you don't demand them, as long as you don't require signing on. So there may still be ideas that are being taught, but the contracts are going to change such that we can limit what's taught as gospel, simply to comply with this House bill. And I think that's an interesting twist on that, is I hadn't considered the effect on the contract language, and now it's being brought to the forefront.
Then the last set is with 1557, and so you can kind of see the language that's proposed there, and that would be included under the school board section of board policy, which is 1.0, where it talks about parental rights and student welfare, and it kind of points out, you'll see the language there is almost verbatim as to what's in the statute.
Well, thank you for making sure we're in compliance.
Thank you.
In 1557, what I did with that is I brought in 1404 from last year. Now, 1404 was never adopted outright as a policy, but those things, in speaking with Mr. Brodsky and also with Melanie Sanders and Laura Fogarty and Roger Daly, those things were here and there about in policy and in practice. And so all I did with 1404 was to bring it in so that it's in line, because people have said, well, where's your policy on that? Where's your 1404 policy? Where's your, now it exists, there it will exist, because it'll be part of the Parents' Bill of Rights. They'll all be consolidated together, 1404 and 100220 and whatever's come from this bill.
Are there any questions on that? But please give me a call if there's any questions or concerns, either related to any one of these 3 legislative pieces at the end. So with that, that is the end of this part of the presentation. We have one more presentation. Last but not least, Michaela Buchanan going to give you an update on the foundation, as well as answering questions about the staffing needs within the foundation.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me come today and talk to you a little bit about the Ed Foundation and what we're hoping to accomplish over the next 3 years, and why before you are some allocation changes and the job descriptions that you saw last month and approved. So thank you very much for that. We're really appreciative of it, and we hope that with these changes we can continue to do the good work. So basically we came up with our strategic goals for the next 3 years through 2025, and among them we have many successes that we're excited about. We're ready to move forward on the momentum we have in the community, but we have identified that we still do have some challenges and some opportunities, however you decide to look at them. And those are around brand awareness and our unrestricted giving. So when you think about out in the community, the folks that people are going to when they want to support public education, we think that should be us. We're the direct support organization. So we have the state match. We want to be able to show folks the value that we're providing to the schools. But we know that we need additional staff to help do that as day-to-day programs continue on, volunteer recruitment continues on. But as we open up past COVID and all of those fun things, we know that marketing and fundraising are going to be really important to the CEO role, and then the vice president will continue the program oversight and volunteers. Just on a really high level for you guys, this has not come out in any other thing yet, but to reach more teachers, to provide more value, really just to all the schools. And these were the 4 goals we came up with. So as I mentioned, brand, resource development, very important. We will continue supporting high quality programs. We do measure and evaluate all our programs. So if you're ever interested in sort of what are those outcomes you guys are looking at, we track everything from the number, the outputs of teachers that come to our store, but also how they are saving an average per shop, how are their students engaging in the classroom because kids have pencils. And then on the STEM side, you've got obviously kids who want to go into STEM majors or that they've learned computer science skills, and we're tracking that ongoingly. Okay. For reference, I had to piecemeal this together from a report, so that's why it sort of looks maybe a little aligned here. But I only chose the foundations that are similar in size to us, that are direct support organizations, and by similar in size to us, I mean student FTE for the district, not necessarily revenue generated, because what I'm trying to demonstrate here is typical staffing of education foundations. And so before you is the whole point of the allocation and why we think we really need this. The foundation is footing the bill for all of this. It's through our fundraising efforts that we'll be able to pay for the staffing changes. But just for reference, this is typical of education foundations. Some are a little bit larger, and our independent friends are in yellow, so you can see that they're not directly tied to the school district. So that might be confusing to you, but there's a direct support organization that has to follow the DSO Florida statutes. Then there are independent education foundations, meaning they are their own completely separate entity. There's no legal bounding really, aside from the fact that they get the state of Florida matching dollars every year for that county. And they're very large in staffing typically. For us, we have one staff right now, right? We've got about $500,000 that we're raising. So you can see on average, you've got a little over 5 people on staff at these ed foundations, and you can see that the revenue that they're generating because of that is higher. Typically, one person, development staff, will raise about a maximum of $250,000. So you're kind of looking at 3 people for roughly $1 million in education foundations, which is slightly better than average across the charity standards of 250. But typically you've got program development people, then you have your fundraiser, and then you have the CEO or executive director, whatever they call themselves, and then you might have an administrative person. And so we're really just advocating for a second full-time, again, just sort of like a program, volunteer manager, and then this role will maintain its marketing and fundraising, community-facing effort. And I think that is it for informational purposes. Yes, thank you. Are there any questions I can give? Yes, Ms. Clark.
Very important.
Yes.
Are you going to give us plenty of notice when Dolly Parton is coming to raid?
Yes. I'm hoping that, like the hospital, we too will get $1 million gift from them. I'm hoping one day. Our fingers crossed. Yeah.
So let me just say, McKalen Foundation has done a great job. The fundraising has increased, the level of support for our teachers, the programs. I'm excited about the Parent Connect program, which will be a new program to involve parents positively within our school system, and kind of provide another avenue for people to connect with our district. And there's no doubt that she's done a great job fundraising. And so if you're looking like, okay, we're not paying any more, right? So this is kind of a no-brainer. But I think providing a platform by which she can review some of the work that's been done would be important for you to kind of see that and the direction. And of course, she's trying to portray the direct link between having more people and the ability to fundraise more with more people to do some of the work that's currently being done.
And to that point, to add, like, for example, right now, and scheduling, everything is all done, or moving boxes, or like the actual fundraising and solicitation, the thank you notes, like all of that's being done, by one person. And so typically you've got a staff of, 3 or 4 people at an education foundation in like-sized areas that help in that work. So we think one more full-time person will really make us a lot stronger. Our board of directors is really excited about the opportunity, and the list is available for you all. So if you have any questions for them, I'm happy to connect you with G. She's the board chair. Lisa's our outgoing chair. So just let me know.
Are you going to keep the part-time position also? Will
No.
it be 2 full and 1?
No, just the 2 forms. We're going to be moving it.
Well, it's amazing what the foundation has done and how you've changed it. It's not the same Clay Education Foundation it was in 2010. It's very different. And of course, the state giving the matching grants, they didn't always do that, so that's wonderful, and it's grown. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The partnership with the district is so strong, and we're very grateful for that. We too go to state conferences, and we get to hear about maybe some not as strong relationships, not that any of those existed for ed foundations, and we're just very grateful to be in Clay and work in Clay and be able to do this for the schools and the students. So.
I appreciate the willingness of the foundation to reach out and offer solutions to questions and things like that, especially with the Tools for Schools in Keystone. I really appreciate that, because I did hear so many people say they wanted to participate, but by the time they drove there and then drove back, and especially if it wasn't a planning day or killed their planning day doing that. So I appreciate that,
Absolutely.
Your willingness to do that.
Thank you.
Well, the original.
Could I say something?
Oh, go ahead, Mary. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I've noticed in my work with the foundation is the enthusiasm. And the enthusiasm, not just from Michaela and, people sort of in charge, but the enthusiasm of the people who are involved and wanting to help our children. And that has been huge, and it's been obvious, and I just wanted to say thanks to Michaela and her team, because the board of directors and all of the people who work with the foundation have just done so much to help us and to help our students and to help our teachers. And 4 Tools for Schools in a year, truly, people have had the opportunity to come numerous times to pick up supplies, and that's been huge. So thank you, Michaela.
Thank you, Ms. Bola.
So I think that's it.
Good, thank you.
So if I could, just as closing comments before we go, one question that I often get from folks that I've gotten for 32 years is, what do you do in the summer? Like summer is like this time, like there's no kids, all right, so everybody's just hanging out, doing
Head to
something.
the beach, right?
Right, so let me just kind of fill the board in what we've done so far. To the credit of our administrators throughout the district, you remember the last day for teachers was the day after Memorial Day. And so then we went right into administrative training for the rest of that week. During that training, we talked about such things as connecting with our families and how to do that, particularly around areas such as attendance. We have seen a decrease in the average student attendance in today's world. So how do you get students to come back to school? Well, one, you have to create an atmosphere where people want to come back. That's step one, through positive programs, but also kind of enforcing the policies that are already in place in regard to student attendance and the fact that school really is not optional. My dad always told me 2 things: school's not optional and learning's not optional either. Right, so you come to school, and it's always been a belief that I've had, and so kind of reestablishing that in today's day and age is important. The second area that we focused on was positive student behavior support. In other words, you have to not only have students come back, but there's an expectation as to behavior of students within our school system. That expectation needs to be stated clearly to individuals, and it's not only related to consequences given for misbehavior, but how do you create an atmosphere in which students want to be there, And then what kind of positive programs are we going to be to encourage students and student behavior? And so focusing on that was another huge part of what we did with administrators. We also focused on teacher supports, right? How do we make sure that our educators are supported so that they have the tools that they need to be successful with our students? There's no doubt that the gold standard in education is the teacher within the classroom, the student physically present within the classroom with high expectations for students, high expectations for learning, as well as high expectations for students' behavior. We also spent some time talking about legislative updates and how to implement those updates. And part of that, of the legislation, and the myriad of legislation, is all kinds of leadership teams that go on, whether it's the Reading Council or school improvement process. There's many, many teams that how to consolidate that into a workable manner. Because remember, legislators have the tendency to always add and to never subtract. I think we reached a point in education where the condensing of some of those things is necessary in order to efficiently work our way through the system. So we did all of that, as well as we did training, safety training relative to reunification, relative to active assailant procedures, as well as shelter training, right? I hate to say it's hurricane season. Right? It's the first day of hurricane season. We had John Warren, Emergency Management, was there in order to provide us with training for shelters, because our buildings are used as shelters as soon as major storms come through. So all of those things happened first week, right? Then the second week, we had teachers coming back for Teacher Leadership Academy. And Teacher Leadership Academy is, a second year of the academy, and it spawned off a very simple idea, which is together as a team, we're much stronger than any one individual could ever be in any school. And so each school has a leadership team, and the primary purpose or focus was to create capacity within those individuals to lead others. Could you imagine if you took the very best employees that you have in a school and actually trained them and provided some tools and resources on how to spread their positiveness, their skills, and the things that they possess to others? And think of the benefit that ultimately goes down to the end user, which of course is our students. So there was 2 intense weeks of training in a variety of formats to get us to the point where we are now. And I could say that today is like the first day that I've had the opportunity to breathe. And then I follow this up with a meeting with Mr. Bickler. So it just keeps going and going, right? So
The training was easier, right?
Well, I was truly impressed with the positive nature of everyone, both the administrative group in that first week and their positiveness and their go-get-itness in the world that we have. I always hear, like, because when you watch news tends to be negative, and sometimes social media is also. And so what I see on the news and what I hear from those that actually go on to social media that tell me about it, I don't see that within the people that work within the Clay County school system. And so very, very proud after those 2 weeks. And so I thought I would answer the question, like, what do I do during the summer? And so that's my answer. So that's it, Ms. Gilhousen.
Thank you, Mr. Brodsky. School board attorney remarks?
I do need to bring up that we have had a due process request filed against the district arising out of an HR matter that was taken up by the school board at the last board meeting. In reviewing the policies, it appears when Ms. Troutman and I are looking at it and Mr. Brodsky, that we can have that due process hearing in-house. So Ms. Boa, as the board chair, in the past, in the several that I've done, we've always used the board chair as the hearing officer and then brought it back to the full board with your recommendations. Unless the board wants to change direction and do something different, that would be my intent on this. But all of you need to be aware that it's happening, because it is going to result in a hearing. And it is gonna result in scheduling that, Ms. Bowley, you're gonna have to participate in, because we're gonna have to have a trial, and you're the judge. I will be your lawyer. We've got another attorney that will be representing the superintendent, and then we have the union attorney that will be representing the individual employee. And so that's our position and our spot right now. So unless anybody wants something completely different, Ms. Bowling, you're it.
Okey-dokey.
Okey-dokey. If you have any questions about any of it, any time during the process or even today, just give me a holler and give me a call.
What's the timeline? When do you expect all of this to take place?
50, it's 60 days from the 6th of June.
Okay.
So, now, that's
Okay.
what the APA says.
Mr. Wickner?
The APA says 60 days, but whenever you get into attorneys' calendars, that 60 days is very malleable. You can extend it or shorten it, but more than likely it will be extended some period of time, not a lot. But, because everybody's busy.
I will contact you for dates
That'd
and
be-
let you know when I'm available,
That'd be
and
great.
you can take it from there.
Okay, if you'll give me a call anytime this afternoon or anytime this week, I'll be here.
Okey-dokey.
Thank you. And that's all.
Them to do that during this time, so, with this short break that they have. But anyway, that's all I have.
Ms. Clark?
Just to reiterate, summer's here, but a lot to do, so,
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Right there.
Ms. Bola, anything you wanted to share?
Yes, I do. Couple of things. The first is, I did make a comment during the idea of bringing back substitute teachers to the front office, so to say. Having been in that position and followed up with Kelly, couple of comments. Mr. Brodsky mentioned that we have in the past reviewed that, and I welcome the review, of course, financially. However, I think we're going to find that Kelly Services is still going to be the most economical. Number two, Ms. Kirkus, you mentioned that we don't have, that there used to be more teachers who had subs that they could trust, and et cetera. And truly, through Kelly Services, we have built that. I'm speaking from experience when I was a teacher. And there were specific subs that I would contact, and to this day, I know that many of those subs are still working through Kelly Services, and we greatly appreciate them. So personally, I would be in favor of staying with Kelly Services. And I think, and I can't speak for the administration and the front office, but I have a feeling they would probably go with Kelly Services also. Just a comment. And number two, in the mental health area issue, yes, it would be wonderful to have a mental health counselor at each of our schools. That would be so ideal. My concern is for the teachers. I'm hoping that we are doing whatever we can to provide mental health counseling for our teachers as well, and that our administration knows, and I know that they are very much aware, that when teachers need to speak to someone, they help make that available to them. This has been a horrible year, and it brightens my day to be able to go on Facebook and see so many of the vacations that so many teachers are taking. And I'm with Ms. Bullock. I'm hoping that everyone is truly enjoying their summers and taking this as a mental health break as well. So the only comments I have to make. By the way, it was warmer here in Wisconsin yesterday than it was in Jacksonville. So without air conditioning, I can assure you that the breeze off the lake was very much welcome. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Bola. All right, well, if there are no further comments, then I'll adjourn our meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
The contracts on there.
On my list.
Lots of complaints.